So this was, it's sort of a bit odd because it's not an FAO official publication, but somehow we managed to pull this off. My manager somehow approved it. So it's very casual. Please stand up and get your drinks and cheese and whatever during the event. But I thought I'd maybe start off by us just kind of introducing ourselves, because I understand some of them are Charlotte's dad's friends, and some of them are Charlotte's current friends, etc., etc. So it's like a Charlotte love fest. It wasn't really meant to be like that. But I just wanted to kick off this event asking Charlotte a couple of questions. And then Charlotte is going to read a little bit from her book. After that, you may ask Charlotte anything you want, from what is the Taliban really like, to what were your greatest achievements in Afghanistan, etc., etc. So, to kick it off, Charlotte, you had named your book, The Land of Eternal Hope. Can you tell us a little bit why that was the title you chose?
Well, I think Dorothy already kind of answered that question for me, and it's true that especially for Afghanistan, it's kind of become one of those countries, the countries of bad news. And we always hear only about the corruption or the terrorism, and yet when we know where we started from, what has happened in the last 15 years in Afghanistan is just amazing, or last 14 years, sorry, 13 years. I worked there the first time in 2000 for about a year with an emergency NGO, Action Against Hunger, and there we were really doing just basic emergency programs. The country was under Taliban control. There was no sign of the situation getting any better. Quite on the contrary, the only person that was resisting the Taliban was Massoud. He was losing some of his ground in the northeast. And when I left in January 2001, we really had no hope, and basically Afghanistan was on a lifeline. Kabul was a bombed, dead city with nobody in the streets, no life, barely any shops. We were maybe 100 aid workers trying to, basically put a little band-aid on a massive wound, and we couldn't even begin to think about any kind of constructive development. So I remember writing a lot of my work then was doing nutritional surveys, and you write recommendations like you would write a litany of wishful thinking. We should diversify diets. We should help women improve the feeding of their children. We should, and instead we were just giving them a bag of fortified wheat flour. Take that, feed your kid for a week, come back, and then what? And then 2002, everything started just booming. We rebuilt everything, and we completely take for granted what it takes to have a state function. But when you start meeting in parties, like, what do you do? Oh, I'm a civil engineer, and I'm helping rebuild that road. Or, what do you do? I'm a water sanitation expert. We're setting up the water sewage system for Kabul. What do you do? Oh, I'm a civil service expert. We're helping build up, the capacity of the government to manage it. You're like, oh, what do you do? I'm a prosecutor. I'm helping train the judiciary. And you're like, oh, wow. So everything that needs to be done for a state to function, and on all these fronts, there have been massive achievements. So I think a lot has happened. And the other reason for hope is Afghanistan is one of the countries with the harshest situations in terms of the climate. They have, in some parts, it's 9-month-long winters. And others, it's just transit deserts. They are an amazingly resilient people, and they have seen it all, and they're still standing strong and positive, and they're so committed to rebuilding their country. Of course there's hope. And if we don't have hope, we might as well just, stop everything? No way. We have to have hope. There's no other way.
Sounds good to me. Thank you. So now you're at the FAO. When you went to Afghanistan initially, you were with an NGO, right? Mm-hmm. What made you go to Afghanistan in the first place? I mean, you were a staffer in Paris. How did Afghanistan happen for you?
Actually, I was actually not even an intern. I was a volunteer, because I was too young to start working with an NGO, and so I I sneaked my way into the NGO, volunteering to be a translator for free. I was fresh out of my master's in nutrition, and so after 3 months of having infiltrated the organization, they're like, "So where do you want to go?" And I was thinking I'd be going off to Burundi or Sierra Leone or what have you, because those were the hot spots of the time. And then one day at the coffee machine, the head of the nutrition department says, "And how about Afghanistan?" I'm like, "Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Okay, sure, why not?" and
Great
that
thing about being what, 22?
22, yeah. And the funny thing is, I went home that night and I tell my mom, "Mom, I'm going to Kabul in January," and she's like, "Oh, that's great." And then she's like, "You know, I was really worried you'd be going to Sierra Leone or Burundi or one of those places." We did that. Our NGO colleagues, there had been a few 30 cases of rape and assaults in those countries, so the Taliban felt like a much safer option.
Pre-2001.
Pre-2001.
Okay. And my last question was, there's been a lot of books written already about Afghanistan, from more of a military angle, from other angles. What made you, an FAO employee, to want to write a book about Afghanistan?
Well, I think actually I've discovered, I think a lot of us want to write a book one day. But I would sometimes, there are two aspects. I was so fed up of the way Afghanistan is portrayed by the media, the negativity. And so, and often I would write letters home and I'd put pictures in them and or I'd come home and people say, "Oh, why are you in Afghanistan?" "Oh, because the Afghans are wonderful," and they're like, "Whoa, this is not what we're hearing." And you show these letters, like, "Why don't you write a book?" And I'm like, "You know, other people have written books." I'm like, "No, but we don't get the same message." So that was one thing. And then, so it took years of the idea maturing and me being fed up by the media. And then I said, okay, when I came home from my assignment with FAO 2008, I thought it was the end. Well, I went back 7 times afterwards, but I thought I want to continue the adventure in a way or another. I received a lot from this country. It's given me so much. I'd like to continue that adventure, and I wanted to write, but I wanted it to be about my friends, about the Afghans. I'm like, we hear a lot about Afghanistan, but we don't hear the Afghans. And I hesitated a lot because I felt there were a lot of people writing about me in Afghanistan, and I didn't want that. So I had friends pushing me to do it, and I thought, okay, I can use me to talk about Afghanistan, and use me to help, you know, and so I went back, but I started writing, and then I got stuck. I'm like, no, this is not working. So this has to be, you know, about my friends. So and the only people who can talk about them are themselves. So it took me a year to find an opportunity to go back with the freedom to be able to go to people's houses, because most NGOs and UN, you can't move, you can't go to people's houses, you're under tight security. And so I found an opportunity, and I interviewed my friends, and I heard their story. And first of all, I felt like I was a very bad friend, because I'd been working, or I'd known some of them for many years, and I realized how little I knew about them. And when I heard their story, I'm like, this has got to be heard. You know, they're not these amazing heroes, or they're people like you and me who've been through an amazing destiny. And so I you know, once I have had their stories, okay, this has got to come out. And I think that's where I then went home and been through all of that.
Okay, so I think Charlotte will read from her book for us, but I'll say that it is for sale for $15 here, and then I think there's a website that you said that you can buy them later on. I understand the French version, if you are French readers, is available on Amazon.fr, but the English one is not available on Amazon.
Yeah, I'm going to try to figure that one out.
And that her proceeds are going to be donated to support Afghanistan groups. Before we start, I did notice that Severin, you sneaked in, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I did. But we all went around and introduced ourselves. A lot of them are Charlotte's dad's friends from the World Bank, including Mr. James Bond himself. So Severin has been a really big supporter of nutrition-sensitive agriculture at the bank. So Severin, if you could just introduce yourself.
My name is Severin Coleridge.
From your book, and after that, Q&A, please ask Charlotte anything you like.
Wow. I mean, it's a bit, I wasn't sure what to choose, I must say. Sometimes I feel very prepared and I choose a little extracts of one or two of my friends' stories and a little bit of my own, but I think also given the theme of nutrition-sensitive agriculture, which is one of our glues tonight, I'm going to share a little extract from one of the most powerful moments that I've lived in my professional life, and maybe to give a little bit of context to it. My first work in Afghanistan was doing a lot of nutritional surveys, and that means going to houses, we sampled houses with teams of surveyors, and you measure kids to estimate the percentage of malnutrition. And that was fine in Kabul when we had treatment centers. It was much harder in other cities like Kandahar or Herat, where we did not have treatment centers, because it happens that you measure a kid who's about to die, and you don't know what to do. Sometimes you walk away without even trying. Sometimes you try, telling the mother, please join me at the hospital tonight, and her mother-in-law says, no, she will not leave the house. So those were some of then I also spent a few months in the Somali region of Ethiopia in 2001, and again found myself in these situations. You find a dying child and you feel powerless to do anything about it, and that is, for an aid worker, I think, the harrowing moments. But I've also had this beautiful moment I'm about to share with you, and you will maybe understand it was special. The context is we were doing a big cause of malnutrition is when families do not provide young children, so especially from 6 months onwards, with adequate diets. And unfortunately, often a very important cause is the mothers simply don't know. So we were doing assessments of local practices in that regard to help them improve the recipes they used with local foods. So we had surveys going in Kabul, Bamyan, Herat, Badakhshan. And here I'm going back to Herat. I'm glad to get back to the sweetness of life in Herat, under the shade of countless pines that line its roads and avenues, and back to my colleague Freba's innate calm. She has organized everything perfectly, and we can begin our survey work in a village on the outskirts of Herat city. The security situation is getting steadily worse in the region, and it's hard to get far from the city. We start by organizing a group cooking session hosted by the head of the village women's council, a pretty young and dynamic mother with a natural and unassuming air of authority. We go back to the same village every day to do 3 or 4 interviews each time. After 4 days, we've almost completed our sample, and we go around the village knocking on doors to find households with children under 2 years old to complete our survey. We were in a small dirt back road lined with high walls made of parsa, about to knock on a large carved wooden door, when a young woman wrapped in a long black veil comes towards us. "I've been looking for you," she says. "They told me that you were in the village, and I need your help. My child is sick." We follow her back to her house. She opens an old wooden door and lets us into an empty courtyard with a small overgrown garden. Behind it is a very simple cob house made up of 3 rooms that open onto the garden. As we go into the courtyard, other women come over to us with a 10-month-old child crying at the top of his lungs, so thin that the skin of his bottom is slack and wrinkled. His mother passes him to us with an anguished, desperate look, as if she were placing her helplessness in our hands. I take him in my arms. No need to measure him to know that he's suffering from severe malnutrition. We ask the mother if we can go inside to talk, so that she can explain the situation. We're led into a small dark room with an earthen floor, where the women lift their veils to show vibrant multicolored dresses. Their braids and jewelry, along with the absence of furniture, tells me that this is a nomad family who must have taken up residence in the village to see out the winter. The men watch us cautiously from a distance, respecting the boundaries of the women's world. We sit down on the floor, on old mattresses, and get out our questionnaire, a reliable tool with which to start a diagnosis. Over the course of the young mother's responses, we hear a tale all too often told that cost the lives of so many children in this country. The mother, Laila, thinks herself to be around 13 or 14. Her child, Ali Ahmad, is about 14 months old. She's 7 months pregnant with a second child. I look up in surprised silence. Her dress is certainly loose-fitting, but I have to look harder to make out any sign of the child growing in her womb. When I realized that I was pregnant about 4 or 5 months ago, my mother-in-law told me that I should stop breastfeeding because my milk had become haram, impure according to the Quran, although the Quran does not say so, and it could make Ali Ahmad sick. So I stopped breastfeeding him. I could see that it wasn't good for him, and I wanted to start breastfeeding again. But my mother-in-law made me put black sheep's wool on my breasts with a bitter liquid on it. It made my baby cry. Ever since then, he hasn't wanted to come near my breast. When my mother-in-law left, I tried to breastfeed again, but I have no more milk, and Ali Ahmad refuses to suckle. She tells us all this shyly, her eyes to the floor. As she talks, Laila rocks Ali Ahmad on her knees. He won't stop crying, and Laila, with a look of humiliation and despair, hands her child over to her cousin, who has a little 9-month-old daughter of her own and breastfeeds both babies. I notice the way that the cousin reluctantly takes Ali Ahmad to her breast, her face betraying her fear of not having enough milk to feed her daughter, who looks all 3 months younger than she should. I ask them if they give their babies food in addition to breast milk. Ali Ahmad's mother gives him a little bread, sweetened tea, and sometimes a baby porridge made from wheat flour. Her cousin doesn't give any extra food to her little girl yet. These 2 children are starving. And yet the interview reveals that the main constraint is apparently not a financial one. The family eats meat at least twice a week and has guests at least 3 times a week. The 2 young mothers seem to spend a considerable amount of money on health care for their babies. The cousin's words reveal the heart of the problem when we tell them that they should complement breastfeeding by introducing other foods from the age of 6 months. We didn't know. I finished the interview by telling Laila, "Your baby is hungry. There isn't much that we can do today, but we'll come back tomorrow with more advice, or rather the day after, since tomorrow's Friday. In the meantime, you need to feed him small quantities of food at a time, but as often as he seems hungry. Try giving him various types of food and see which he likes." The mother gives me an embarrassed look. She feels ashamed. It strikes me that the little one isn't the only one having a hard time. It must be so painful for this young woman to feel incapable of looking after her child. On Saturday morning, we return armed with our gas stove, our pans and ingredients bought from the corner market. Sourcing varied foodstuffs is not a problem near Herat. As a city at the crossroads between Central Asia and Iran, it's rich with trade and its soil is well suited for farming. We arrive at the doorstep of the courtyard just as the young father is going in. He doesn't dare look up at us, but a shy smile breaks through his thick beard as he opens the large door with his free hand. The other holds a plastic bag containing a cauliflower. The women welcome us ecstatically, taking the plastic bag from the young man's hands. "The baby loves cauliflower," they tell us with smiles all around. We go into the women's room to see Ali Ahmad lying on a sheet. His eyes are open, and he's not crying anymore. His face is still as pale as before, and he's still very frail, but his cheeks look a little less hollow to me. His mother seems more confident. We sit down to cook. To keep the little ones quiet, we crush a banana, adding a dash of milk and a sprinkle of sugar. At first, Ali Ahmad refuses to eat from the spoon, which he associates with bitter syrups and other tablets he's been given. It reminds him of medicine his mother offers. So she feeds him with her fingers, and in no time he's eaten a whole banana in ravenous gulps. I'm relieved. When severe malnutrition is accompanied by loss of appetite, it often means that urgent treatment at a specialized center is needed. If he's eating, it means that we can do something. His plate cleared, we tempt him with boiled wheat flour mixed with a little bean flour and mashed carrot. He swallows the whole plateful. Then we try mashed potatoes with some milk and a spinach. He keeps eating. The young father appears quietly in the doorway, curious as to what these strange women are up to. Lila looks up at him as she carries on feeding her son. He's eating, she tells him. The young father smiles, his eyes beginning to well up. The parents' gazes meet each other and turn to their child, visibly relieved and happy. Suddenly, Ali Ahmad stops eating. He looks at us with a slightly lost expression and pulls a funny face. I'm worried that he might regurgitate it all. The mother looks up and tells us, he's full, and so he should be. Then Ali Ahmad's face contorts into a grimace. His mother looks at him as perplexed as we are. He's smiling, she says suddenly with a big grin. Her baby has been crying for months, and now he can learn to smile again. In the weeks that follow, Freba goes back to the village a number of times to make sure that Ali Ahmad and the other children we came across on our visits continue to eat well and grow. He's barely recognizable, she tells me when talking about him. He's put on a lot of weight, and all of the mothers in the village are talking about him and our recipes. Just to give you a glimpse of what it can be, I'll share just a very brief passage from a friend of mine with whom I worked during the Taliban time. We were doing nutritional surveys together. She's a woman, a very dynamic, bright woman from an ethnic minority, the Hazaras, who've often been marginalized, but she is a success story and was a very hard worker, and today occupies a very senior position in government, actually. This is when we saw each other again in 2002. I came back after about a year and a half away from the country, and she's telling me about the events of September 2001 from their perspective. When Masood died, it was not a very big event for me. I was quite glad that he died, actually. I saw him as one of the key players in the fighting and considered that one of the major reasons for the fighting was now gone from the scene. But the attack on the World Trade Center was very scary for us. We did not have access to TV in those days, but the news we did manage to receive scared us, especially when we were able to see the footage of the towers collapsing. The situation became tense in Kabul, and we stopped going to work regularly. We were afraid because we all expected that the Americans would bomb the Taliban and destroy the whole city. Many people left Kabul, and my entire family went to Ghazni. Only one of my nephews, who was 19 at the time, and myself stayed in our house. Only a few of us from the Children in Crisis team were going to the office. Most of the streets were empty. Some people were quite optimistic and were expecting that the Taliban would leave, that this would be the end of ethnic fighting and political clashes. But the majority of people were thinking about their own life and seeking a safe place to go. They were not even thinking what would happen to the Taliban. Nobody really trusted the Americans. We thought they would do whatever they wanted and that they could repeat Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Kabul. It was very scary. Some of our relatives were advising us to cover our nose in case the Americans used chemical weapons. Many people expected that the Americans would not be concerned about civilian casualties. But when they started the bombings, their aim turned out to be very good. One bomb hit a big military compound in Khaykhana. Another hit Television Mountain. Another targeted a school where many Taliban were living, near to our house. All our windows were shattered. Some glass injured my back slightly because I was sitting on my bed with my back to the window. The fact that they were very careful gave us a lot of hope. And most days I went to work, at least for a few hours, to keep things running in the office. When the Americans' troops started to come, Then everybody started thinking the Taliban would leave. And when they finally left, you should have been in Kabul at that time. We were so happy. You could see children, men, women of all ages in the street. Young men were wearing trousers, shaved their beards and mustache, and displayed photos, mainly of Indian movie stars. The whole city was celebrating. I simply put on a big blue skirt that I used to have, and I started walking around. Wow, it was so nice to walk without having to worry anymore. It was a real celebration. You should have seen people's faces, from the very old people to the youngest children. Everybody was enjoying themselves. Life was very different. We never would have believed that the Americans would come so soon. I went to the center of the city and found a big crowd of people. I was in a taxi, but the taxi driver was unable to get through the traffic. I saw a very old Hazara Baba man looking at something very intently. So I became curious and tried to see what he was looking at. Finally, I saw it. There were photos of Indian movie stars, half naked. For 5 years, nobody had seen any photographs. And everywhere, the sound of music, so loud. On the day we heard that the Taliban had lost, my nephew took his CD player and loudspeakers out on our roof and played music very loud. That is what the majority of people did. In 2 to 3 days, all these televisions appeared in the shops. Satellite dishes, CDs, cassettes, stereos. I have no idea how they all appeared. It was as if the ground had opened and all of a sudden these things grew out of nowhere. The whole city looked different and people had different faces. They were very happy, especially the women. Poor women, they were very happy that they would be going to school and to work again. This euphoria lasted 2 or 3 weeks. Oh, then a little more.